Welcome to my channel Galactic War Story. Thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe. The Empire had already begun to grieve long before death arrived. Across distant systems, lights dimmed in silent respect, trade slowed, and entire populations spoke in quieter tones, as if the universe itself had entered mourning. Their queen was still alive, still breathing, still holding the fragile threads of power together, but everyone knew the truth. Something unseen was killing her, and nothing in their vast knowledge could stop it. From orbit, the capital world glowed with impossible beauty, a lattice of light and motion suspended beneath a sky crowded with ships. It looked eternal, unshakable, but within the highest tower of the royal spire, time had become a different thing entirely. It stretched, heavy and uncertain, each moment weighed down by inevitability. At the center of that stillness lay the queen. Her body, once a symbol of strength and precision, had begun to betray her. Signals that should have moved effortlessly through her nervous system now faltered and failed. Muscles weakened. Coordination slipped. The most advanced physicians in the Empire had mapped every stage of the degeneration, tracking it with flawless accuracy. They could predict her death down to a narrowing window of days. But they could not prevent it. The conclusion had been delivered with perfect clarity. The disease was unique, its mechanism unfamiliar, its progression unstoppable. Treatment slowed nothing. Interventions achieved nothing. It simply advanced, quiet and relentless until nothing remained. Still, she endured with composure that unsettled even her closest advisors. She did not rage against it. She did not deny it. She accepted it with a calm that carried more weight than fear ever could. Those who stood in her presence felt it immediately, not resignation but control. Even now, with her body failing, she remained the axis around which everything turned. Beyond her chamber, however, the Empire adjusted. Plans formed in silence. Power structures shifted beneath careful hands. Diplomatic channels tightened as neighboring systems sensed weakness and recalculated their positions. Stability, once taken for granted, revealed itself as something delicate and easily broken. All of it traced back to a single point. Far from the center of power, in a sterile research sector reserved for foreign specialists, a human studied a problem he was never meant to see. His assignment had been routine. Evaluate trade-related pathogens, cross-reference biological risks, provide recommendations. The kind of work that required precision, not inspiration. He had approached it with professional focus, cataloging data, analyzing trends, appreciating the elegance of Karathi science. Until one file disrupted everything. It did not stand out at first glance. It was heavily restricted, buried beneath layers of clearance that should have kept it out of reach. But a minor anomaly in classification drew his attention, and curiosity did the rest. He opened it, and the moment he began reading, something felt wrong. Not in the data itself. The data was flawless, detailed, exhaustive, beautifully organized. But beneath that perfection, there was a pattern he could not ignore. A structural failure that did not belong solely to one species. It looked familiar, uncomfortably familiar. He leaned closer, isolating key markers, comparing degradation pathways, mapping biochemical responses across different models. The more he analyzed, the clearer it became. Not identical, not exact, but aligned in a way that could not be coincidence. He had seen something like this before. On Earth, in a remote research case, a rare condition triggered by environmental factors that caused cellular repair systems to collapse in cascading failure. It had been nearly impossible to treat. Nearly. The difference had been simple in concept and brutal in execution. Instead of repairing the damage directly, the treatment forced the body to activate an alternative pathway, bypassing the failure entirely. It was inefficient, risky, unstable. But it worked. Sometimes. He sat back, staring at the projection as realization settled in. If the same principle applied here, if the underlying failure was compatible, then the conclusion was unavoidable. This was not untreatable. It had simply been misunderstood. The implication was staggering. The most advanced medical system in the known galaxy had misidentified the nature of the disease affecting its most important individual, not because they lacked intelligence, but because they lacked perspective. They had been looking inward. He was looking across. Hours passed unnoticed as he built models, ran simulations, adjusted variables. Each iteration refined the possibility, sharpening it into something that felt dangerously real, not proven, not safe, but viable. And viability in this context was enough to disrupt an empire. When he finally submitted his findings, the response was immediate. Access logs flagged his activity. Oversight systems triggered alerts. Within hours, inquiries began, quiet but deliberate. A foreign researcher had accessed restricted royal medical data and was proposing an alternative interpretation. That alone was enough to draw attention. What he proposed next ensured it could not be ignored. The medical council reviewed his work with controlled skepticism. Their experience told them the conclusion was unlikely. Their training told them it was flawed. But the data refused to align with their expectations, and that created something far more dangerous than doubt. Uncertainty. Some dismissed him outright. Others remained silent, studying the projections with growing discomfort. The logic was alien, built on assumptions derived from a completely different biological framework. And yet it held together. The risk, however, was undeniable. The Queen's condition was already terminal. Any experimental intervention carried the potential to accelerate the process, to collapse what little stability remained. There would be no second attempt, no correction. One decision. One outcome. When the proposal reached her, the chamber fell into a silence that felt absolute. Every eye watched, every mind calculated, every possibility narrowed to a single choice. Do nothing and death was certain. Attempt the treatment and everything became uncertain. For a long moment she said nothing. Then slowly something shifted in her expression, not hope, not belief, but recognition, the understanding that certainty had already failed her. Uncertainty was all that remained. The human was brought before her. He expected resistance, interrogation, dismissal. Instead, he found something far more difficult to face. Attention. She listened as he explained the mechanism, the alternative pathway. The logic behind forcing a biological system to adapt rather than repair. He spoke carefully, aware of every flaw, every assumption, every unknown variable. She understood all of it. And when he finished, the decision came with quiet clarity. They would proceed. The empire did not celebrate. It held its breath. Because for the first time since her diagnosis, the future was no longer certain. And that made it infinitely more dangerous. Silence followed the decision, but it was not the silence of peace. It was the silence of a civilization standing on the edge of something it could not predict. Across the palace, systems surged into motion, protocols unfolding with relentless precision. Laboratories were cleared and sealed, specialists summoned, entire departments redirected toward a single objective that defied everything they believed. The Queen's illness was no longer a sentence. It had become a challenge. Preparation moved faster than doubt. The human stood at the center of it all, though he never intended to be. Every calculation passed through his hands, every adjustment filtered through his judgment. He worked without pause, refining the treatment, adapting human methodology to an alien biology that resisted simplification. Their systems were elegant, layered with complexity, but complexity had not saved her. Now simplicity, brutal and direct, would be tested. The treatment was not a cure. It was a gamble. Instead of repairing the damage, it would force her body to abandon failing pathways and activate dormant alternatives. It required precise timing, exact biochemical triggers, and a level of coordination that left no margin for hesitation. If it failed, the cascade would accelerate beyond recovery. If it succeeded, everything would change. When the day arrived, the palace felt different, not quieter but sharper, as if every surface carried awareness. No announcements were made, no declarations issued. The empire did not watch openly. But it listened. Inside the medical chamber, the queen rested within a field of softly glowing instruments. Energy signatures traced the contours of her body, mapping every signal, every fluctuation. She appeared calm, unchanged, but the stillness carried weight. This was the moment where certainty ended. The human took his position. Around him, the greatest medical minds of the empire observed in absolute focus. Some still doubted. Others had moved beyond doubt into something more complex. None interfered. The process began. At first, nothing happened. A controlled infusion entered her system, calibrated to trigger the first stage of metabolic redirection. The monitors responded with steady streams of data, unchanged, unremarkable. Stability held, but stability meant nothing. It could collapse at any moment. Minutes stretched. Then a shift. Small, almost invisible. A single indicator dipped, then stabilized. Another followed. The cascade slowed. No one spoke. The human did not move. His attention remained fixed on the data, tracking patterns, confirming that what he saw was real. The degradation was no longer accelerating. It was resisting. Phase 2 initiated. Neural stimulation patterns activated, subtle pulses designed to encourage alternative signaling routes. The response was delayed, uncertain. For several seconds, the system hovered at the edge of failure. Then the signals aligned. Not perfectly, but enough. A murmur passed through the observers, quickly suppressed. Hope was dangerous here. Hope could distort perception. They needed certainty. And certainty did not yet exist. The procedure continued. Each stage built upon the last, each adjustment calculated in real time. The human adapted constantly, modifying parameters as new data emerged. This was not a fixed protocol. It was a negotiation with biology itself. Hours passed. Sweat gathered unnoticed, muscles tensed without release. No one left their position. No one allowed distraction. At last, the final phase concluded. The systems powered down gradually, their glow dimming as the chamber returned to stillness. The queen remained where she was, unchanged to the eye. No dramatic transformation, no visible sign of success. Only data. And data required time. The waiting began. It was the most difficult part. Without active intervention, all they could do was observe. Every second carried possibility but also risk. The treatment could fail slowly, collapsing without warning, or it could succeed just as quietly. The first hours showed nothing. Then the progression halted. Not slowed. Stopped. That alone was enough to fracture certainty across the room. The disease had never stopped before. It had advanced without exception, immune to every attempt at control. Now it held still. The human leaned back slightly, exhaling for the first time in what felt like hours. It was not victory, not yet, but it was proof. Proof that the impossible could hesitate. Days passed under constant observation. The queen remained weak, her body still recovering from the strain of the procedure. But the markers did not return. The decay did not resume. Instead, something unexpected began to appear. Repair. At first it was faint, statistical noise, a deviation small enough to dismiss. Then it repeated. and repeated again. Cells that had been failing began to stabilize. Pathways that had collapsed showed signs of reconstruction. The alternative systems, once theoretical, were activating fully. The chamber filled with a different kind of silence. Not fear. The human studied the results carefully, refusing to accept them too quickly. He verified each reading, cross-checked every output. The data remained consistent. She was healing. The realization spread slowly through the palace, carried not by announcement but by observation. Attendants noticed changes first, subtle differences in movement, slight increases in strength. Then the physicians confirmed what no one dared to say aloud. The queen was no longer dying. She was recovering. On the 5th day she stood. Only for a moment. Only a single step. But it was enough. The act itself shattered the last remnants of doubt. The empire, which had prepared for loss, now faced something entirely different, something it did not know how to process. Relief, disbelief, and something deeper. A shift in understanding. The human watched it unfold from a distance, standing once again before the vast windows of the research wing. The city below moved as it always had, unaware of how close it had come to collapse. Ships continued their silent paths across the sky. Everything looked the same, but nothing was. Behind him, the laboratory had transformed. Where once there had been skepticism, there was now urgency. Teams worked together without hesitation, refining the treatment, expanding its application, pushing beyond the limits they had once accepted. They argued again. They questioned again. They believed again. The Queen's recovery accelerated. Strength returned gradually, then steadily. Neural pathways reformed, coordination improved, energy replaced the constant weight that had once defined her existence. She walked farther each day, spoke longer, engaged more deeply. She lived, and with her the empire stabilized. When she finally appeared before her council again, the reaction was immediate and unrestrained. Not ceremony, not protocol. Relief. She stood without assistance, her presence filling the chamber as it always had, but now with something added. Perspective. The knowledge of how close everything had come to ending. Her gaze moved across those assembled, steady and clear. The future had returned. Later, as the palace settled into a new rhythm, she found the human standing alone, as he often did, watching the endless movement of the sky. For a moment, neither spoke. There was no need. Both understood what had happened. Not just a life saved. A boundary crossed. At last she turned slightly, her voice calm, steady, alive in a way it had not been before. Humanity had seen what others could not. Not because it was greater, but because it was different. And in that difference, something extraordinary had been found. The human allowed himself a small, quiet breath. Then he looked back at the stars. Because he understood something now that the entire empire was only beginning to realize. This was not the end of the story. It was the beginning of something far larger. Something that would reach beyond a single world, beyond a single life, into the unknown expanse where differences were no longer weaknesses, but the key to survival. And for the first time, the galaxy would learn what humanity could truly do.